we'll hand you off to Mike.
Hello everyone, welcome to Zibby's Bookshop. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're very excited to help launch the release of Real Life and Other Fictions by Susan Coll. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think we're going to open up with a reading, but we also have with us tonight Pamela Redmond, who's the author of Younger as well. She'll be in conversation with her. So after the reading, we'll do about a 30-minute conversation, followed by a Q&A, and then we have plenty of books to buy and sign. So enjoy.
Thank you. Well, I wanted, when I posted about this event on social media, Jane Oppenheimer, who I've never met before, but who read the audiobook of the book, told me she lives in LA. And I said, well, why don't you read? Because I'm going to sound so much better to have a professional reader. So she's going to open it for me. I've gotten, everybody loves the audiobook. So I'm very honored to have you here.
Well, thank you for asking. All right. Chapter 1, The Incident on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. A heavy gray slush begins to fall from the sky, and the windshield wipers turn themselves on, startling me. Although the car is 7 years old, it is new to me, and I'm still getting used to its high-tech features, many of which are already obsolete. It has none of the self-driving technology one reads about, for example, so it's entirely on me to stomp on the brakes to avoid hitting the car ahead as traffic comes to an abrupt stop. The vehicle I mercifully did not plow into is a green Honda CR-V with a University of Virginia sticker affixed to the top right corner of the rear windshield. The speed at which I am traveling is precisely 1 mile under the 50 miles per hour limit. I lock into these details because I am the sort of law-abiding to a fault motorist who minds the rules of the road, always staying at or below the speed limit. And because my daughter, Vera, has only a few days ago completed her first semester at the University of Maryland, in front of me is presumably another student, or a former student, or the parent of the student, or an instructor, or someone student adjacent in one form or another, albeit at a different public institution of higher learning. But also, I lock into these details as a way to ground myself. I'm feeling light, without anchor, as if I might unbuckle my seatbelt and crack the window and slip through the slit like a puff of steam or a wisp of smoke. It's not simply that my daughter is away for the holidays for the first time in 19 years. I have also just left my husband. I have brought to a conclusion a long, painful stalemate, taken my poorly behaved puppy, and walked out the door. No harsh words were exchanged, although I had half hoped for a provocation, or at least some display of emotion, when I told him I was leaving, that I was headed to my aunt and uncle's house on the Delaware shore. We were meant to go together. It was our family's long-standing tradition to spend the week between Christmas and New Year's at the beach. And I confess there was still a piece of me that hoped he would protest, that he would apologize and suggest we sort things out, bundle up and take some long walks along the sea and clarify our situation. Maybe find a way to start anew. Instead, he replied only with a warning. The last place you want to be in a weather event is on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Richard and I have been idling in an indeterminate state for some time now, and have more recently begun to trend in the direction of collapse. After a series of problems with which he has refused to engage, first professional, then personal, Richard moved into the basement, where he now works and sleeps. This morning, as I departed, I told him I couldn't live like this anymore. What precisely I hope to achieve, I can't say for sure. I suppose I would have welcomed any sort of reaction, anger included. At least it might have moved us toward the next place, wherever that might have been. But my formerly dynamic, rabble-rousing, storm-chasing meteorologist husband has imploded on so many different, spectacularly painful levels that there is little left of him or of us. He is like a star that has collapsed under its own gravity, a black hole, a closed presence that spends most of its time in space crafting copy for the newspaper's weather desk, staring at a bank of screens. Before slamming on my brakes, I had been singing along loudly to a catchy, infectiously upbeat song that included lyrics about a dog, sung, or rather, hoarsely and charmingly croaked, by an oddly named band called Clap Your Hands, Say Yeah. In the song, the dogs quit their barking. In my car, as it came to its abrupt stop, my dog's barking has just begun. Luna, my puppy, now barks and barks and barks. She stops for a moment, then begins to bark again. In the rearview mirror, I glimpse something fluttering. An insect appears to have presented itself in the car. It flutters, it lurches from one window to the other, flutter, lurching, back and forth madly, which I believe is what prompted the puppy to bark. As my foot continues to press hard on the brake, I wonder idly whether it is odd to have an insect trapped in the car in winter. I catch another glimpse and realize it is a moth. At this point, I feel a shift in my equilibrium, a minor, anxious jolt. To keep myself from thinking about the possibility of being stuck in a traffic jam on a 4-mile-long bridge nearly 200 feet over the largest estuary in the country, I try to focus on practical matters. If the traffic does not ease, I should tell my aunt and uncle that I'll be arriving later than planned. Also, I am low on kibble for the puppy and make a mental note to order more for overnight delivery as soon as I get to their house. Entirely unrelated, I need badly to find a new hairdresser and do something about my too long, nearly feral hair. I try to take a few deep breaths, the sort of yoga teacher might recommend. But my thoughts continue to boomerang toward the end of my metastable marriage, then toward this steel and concrete structure, plus the open water, plus the possible moth. The need to tend to logistics about my late arrival, or kibble, or my wild hair does not detract from so much as compound my anxiety. This might or might not be a good place to mention that my parents died in a bridge collapse. An event that was presaged, some say, by the appearance of a giant moth. I was never sure what to make of this story, but I find myself obsessed with it nonetheless.
Thank you. Thank you. That was like so much better than I would have done. So thank you.
That was great.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Pam. This is Susan, and we have known of each other for 30 years, and really never met until today.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have a mutual good friend, and we both lived in London. So when I read Susan's amazing book, one of the most amazing things about it is that the whole moth bridge thing is true. So maybe you could tell everybody about the true story that it's based on.
Sure. This is this 1967 bridge collapse in West Virginia, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, remains the deadliest bridge collapse in modern history. 46 people died, 2 people were never found. And I hadn't heard about this until a colleague mentioned that something about the Mothman. I'd never heard of the Mothman either. And I started to read more about this and became fascinated. In the year or so before the bridge collapse, there were multiple sightings in the area of a giant creature, like 10 feet tall, giant wingspan, bright red eyes, that was terrifying people in the community. And then was seen shortly before the bridge collapsed, and then it left. It was never seen in the area again. But there have been other sightings of it, supposedly, before other major world disasters, including Chernobyl and the Moscow apartment bombings. And if you go on the internet and go down that rabbit hole, you'll see lots of other possibilities, including recently in Chicago. So I'm not someone super interested in this. I didn't even know the word cryptids before. Cryptids refer to, these kind of mythical creatures, the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, and the Mothman is more of a minor cryptid, not as well known. But I then learned there was a Mothman festival. So this is not the sort of thing I usually do, but something just captured my imagination about this story. So I got in my car by myself, drove 6 hours to West Virginia, got a hotel room, went to the festival by myself, which I don't recommend. It is the kind of place you want to bring a friend. It was a little weird. But that was a long time ago. And then I tried to write a novel about it and didn't really know what it wasn't going anywhere. I stuck it in the drawer. And then I went back to it, and part of what you're hearing in the opening, but can't connect yet, is this Richard is based on there's a movie called The Mothman Prophecies that came out in 2002 with Richard Gere and Laura Linney. And it's not a great movie, but it's about this story, the same story. But that movie took it more in the direction of horror. And because that's based in Washington, because Richard Gere plays a Washington Post reporter, I made this, her husband sort of look like Richard Gere. And there's a lot of, there's a few lines from the movie that kind of trickle into the book. And but it's not horror. It came out as comedy. I can't tell you why, because it's a kind of a tragic story. As you heard, she was orphaned in the bridge collapse, but it's got kind of a lightness, I hope.
How much time passed between the time you first heard about the moth, the bridge, until you actually wrote the novel in earnest?
Yeah, probably about 12 years.
Wow.
It just kind of sat and, kind of rumbled around in my head for a while. I didn't know how I was going to tell it. As my husband, who watched the process, can tell you, I really, all I knew is I'm going to write a novel about the Mothman. And it took me a long time to find the story.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, just writing from the point of view of the orphan daughter is where it began. So.
What do you do normally? I mean, is that the way ideas work for you? Is that something that you just let it play along for a while?
Yeah, they usually just occur to me from some situation. It's either all of my books have been comedy. Even when I've started off thinking I was writing tragic history, like my first novel was about Karl Marx's youngest daughter who committed suicide, and I thought it was a historical novel about this very tragic event. But when I tried to find an agent and then an editor, everybody kept saying, this is very funny. So, so no matter what I do, it goes in that direction. And, I finally, late in my career, the last book, decided, well, I'm just going to lean into this. And I called it a screwball comedy. So rather than, I thought I wanted to write gorgeous literary fiction and was kind of fighting that label. But to actually answer your question, everything's just begun with a moment when either something that's difficult sort of turned the corner to my being able to see the absurdity of the situation. Or one book, Rockville Pike, was just set from, the idea came from visiting the gravesite of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who's buried on this very busy road in Rockville, Maryland called Rockville Pike. And there's like 6 lanes of traffic. And I was very moved by the site of the grave because people still come and leave Fitzgerald, and Zelda's buried there as well, leave them like letters and champagne and flowers. They go any day and it's filled with people paying homage. And then I looked up, and across the street was a giant furniture store, discount furniture store. And I said, well, this is my next novel. So it was set in the furniture store and involves the Fitzgerald. So yeah, it's always just some spark of a moment. And I know the book, but I don't know what the book is, which is not a very efficient way to write. I do a lot of tearing things up.
You said, you told me that you usually start with a setting.
Yeah, that setting, or a setting, or just a situation. So
something I tend to do is, if I get an idea that I think is a good idea, I purposely don't write it down, because I feel like if it's really a good idea, it will keep reasserting itself.
Yeah. Well, in some cases, like my last book, Bookish People, I work at an independent bookstore. And when I first started working there, the owner said to me, "You're not going to write a novel about a bookstore, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not," because I really had no intention of doing that. And then it just, there was a situation there that just kept coming up, having to do with the vacuum cleaner being broken all the time. And there'd be these long, there's something called the end of day report, which I probably have on my phone right now, is it's the end of day in DC, and it tells you everything that just happened that day in the store. And I noticed like the vacuum cleaner was always mentioned in the end of day report because it was broken. And there'd be these notes like, well, it's working, you just have to kick it a few times, or it's in the shop, it'll be back. And then I finally said, this vacuum cleaner's telling me that I need to write a novel. So and I'm doing the same with the next book, which is about a literary nonprofit. And I've been involved with a literary nonprofit for a while. So everybody there is sort of very nervous, but but I don't skewer. I'm not skewering people. I'm just like, these situations get in my head and take root.
Is the hotel, there's a really funny hotel, and all the characters in the town, and the one place to eat, and
so the character and the protagonist in the novel, finally, after this incident on the bridge, she, for a variety of reasons, in addition to her marriage coming to an end and this moth in the car, she finally realizes it's time to go to West Virginia and figure out what happened to her parents, because her aunt and uncle who adopted her took her in. She had a very, happy, normal childhood. She was too young to have remembered anything, but no one will talk about the bridge collapse with her, including her aunt, who is a professional storyteller with a podcast on NPR called The Storyteller. Even she won't talk about it. So the book is a little bit about how family secrets begin to become corrosive. But she gets in the car and drives to West Virginia. And there is a hotel there that they used in the Mothman Prophecies movie.
Wow.
They're very proud of it. They have it hanging, pictures of Richard Gere all over Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And I started to have it be that hotel, but I was a little worried because I was describing it as being a little shabby and, describing it in ways I just, at the last minute, I just changed the name of the hotel because I didn't know what the legal department was going to say. But yeah.
Did you go back to the area when you?
I did. I went back and went to the Mothman Museum. I did some research. I mean, there's a lot of newspaper clips of this incredibly tragic bridge collapse that are, kind of very startling to see. And, the whole town, it's been good for tourism in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, because they have a Mothman statue, and you can follow their Instagram feed. They stick Santa hats on him, and there's a lot of shops selling Mothman, sort of tchotchkes, and so the whole town is kind of Mothman obsessed. And when I reached out to a few bookstores in West Virginia just to tell them that there's a thread of this, because you can't really see that from the book. The publisher didn't want to put the Mothman on the cover, but I wanted people to know. So I wrote to these bookstores and they got very excited. One bookstore in West Virginia said the thing she sells the most are Mothman stickers. So in the bookstore. So it's a big deal in West Virginia.
Have you done a reading there?
Not yet. I may go in the fall.
Yeah.
One bookstore suggested I come in the fall. So
I mean, it was very refreshing to read a story set someplace that I'd never been, that basically nobody has ever been to, except, well, probably nobody in this room.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out. I was a little worried because I don't know this town well. I've only been there a couple times, and the copy editor in the final moments was pointing out to me my West Virginia geography was very off. I forget. I had her listening to a radio station for one, I can't remember which city in West Virginia, but it was very far from where she was. So and geography is not my strong suit. So I'm waiting for someone from West Virginia to tell me that I really, insulted everybody with my description, but I didn't. I mean, it's loving description. I really love this town, and but there's a restaurant in the book that's a real restaurant.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
It's like the restaurant in town.
Yeah, a lot of the important scenes take place in the restaurant.
How long was the process of writing the book?
I think a couple years for this one. Again, I'm not a very efficient writer in that I don't know what I'm doing until I do it, and then I rip it up and go back. So this book had a lot of false starts. Again, because I didn't know the story. I won't give away the end, but if I'd known what the story was, it would have been easy to write. I had to kind of figure it out as I went along.
How many drafts did you do you think?
Yeah, I don't, these days I don't even know, because you don't have to keep drafts, right? You just go back to the file and delete, which I did this morning, painfully deleted about 5 pages of something I'm working on, but I don't know, maybe 5 or so drafts before I turned it in. And then my editor had me go back and do one more big rewrite. And I'm also fortunate. My husband is a novelist as well. And even better than that, a very good editor. So he's able to give me a lot of feedback before I then turn it in and have to get it rejected. So
How do you give each other feedback without hurting feelings?
Well, I want feedback. I want to hear what's not working. I don't want him to tell me it's great. So I have a thick skin about that, but that's actually what I want to hear. And I think he has a very thick skin. So, so yeah, it works. It works well. I sometimes, I think he gets more excited about what I'm working on than I do. So like we'll wake up in the morning and he's got an idea for me. And like, I don't want to hear, I don't want to talk about this book. So.
Well, you have a busy life with your other job, and how do you fit writing in?
Yeah, it is a little too busy. I'm now working part-time. I work like 25 hours a week at this bookstore doing events such as this. And I was teaching, but I've cut that out and cut the nonprofit out. So now I'm just writing and working in the bookstore, which is a pretty good balance. I try to write in the morning. I'm pretty disciplined. I'm getting less disciplined with age, but relatively disciplined about just working in the morning. I very rarely go out to lunch or meet anyone in the morning. So I'll do that till about 1 o'clock. And then that's when the bookstore team's chat line starts popping, or, I'll work in the evenings because the events are in the evenings. So it's actually a pretty good balance. And I really like working in a bookstore and helping other authors with events, because then I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. It just, it takes the pressure off too, just kind of counterintuitively, but seeing all these other books out in the world and also seeing kind of the life cycle of books. Like they come and they go. And when you work in a bookstore, the books are just inventory in a way, they're just boxes of things that come in on a truck, and they either sell or they don't sell. You put them back on the truck. It's a product. So it makes it feel less like, you work on a book so long, it feels like the most important thing in the world, but it's really not. That helps keep perspective.
And how far are you into the next book at this point?
The next book, for the first time, I mean, it's also driven by the fact that I have a deadline already in August, which is kind of crazy. But this book is taking a character. I've never done this before. You would probably have things to say about this. I'm taking a character from the last book, and it's a whole different story, but I'm finding just knowing the character already is making it 100% easier to write. I know who she is, and I don't have to figure out all those details. So it's been kind of fun to write. But again, with my very first novel that I never published because I couldn't sell, I remember one editor looking at it and saying, "What a pleasure to have a novel with too much going on instead of nothing going on." But no, thank you. And so my books tend to get very over plotted, which is why I sort of call the last one Screwball. I've got a lot of crazy, just like planes in the air that I then need to land. And so I know the whole story of the next one, but I don't know how to bring all these ridiculous plot points I've set in motion together. So I'll
do you just figure it out as you go along?
Yeah, a lot of, false starts and a lot of now dog walks where we kind of try to kind of untangle it. That's the part I said I'm not good with geography. I'm not good at like plotting. I can plot. I just can't, it takes a lot to connect I've just got some ridiculous plot points going on that I need to figure out how they converge. But it's very satisfying when they do. That's part of what I love about writing novels. I love jigsaw puzzles, and it's sort of the same thing. Like at very end of this book, I got sent by my editor, an agent, to do the end a couple times, and there was just this one scene in the book early on. It's not an important scene, but it's just she's on the beach and some new neighbors walk by and everyone's talking. And my editor said, it's very nice, but what is it doing here? It's not doing anything, but I couldn't bring myself to cut the scene. And then when I got to the end, I realized it was going to loop back and end with those people. So there's, just the kind of figuring out why you have stuck these pieces there and then bringing them together again is kind of satisfying.
Yeah. The things that bubble up from your unconscious or that capture your imagination. You don't really know why, but there usually is a reason.
Yeah. And I tell my students, which is a line that Cassie has in the book, that the DNA of the story is already in the book.
Yes.
So when you can't find the answer, you just have to go back, and it's in there. The book is sort of, I'm not a very mystical woo-woo person, but there is something about the process that it's already there, and the book can tell you how to write itself if you just spend enough time with it.
Yeah, you said when you started this, it was you started in the summer, and then.
Yeah. I mean, getting this off the ground took a while, and some of it was I just had some of the wrong puzzle pieces. So it was set in the summer, and one draft in, I'm like, it's not working because it needs to be set in the winter. And it did for a whole variety of reasons. Part of it is the bridge collapse in West Virginia was right before Christmas.
Oh, it was.
Oh,
that's interesting.
So I don't know why it didn't occur to me that this would be better told in the winter, but but many other things just clicked when I changed it and changed the tense, changed the, from third person to first person. It just took a lot of massaging, and then all of a sudden it's in the right groove and it starts to go. So.
That's a big change, third person to first person.
Yeah, and the tense. And I had left the whole first chapter in the past tense because originally I thought that this was going to be a novel that my character then sat down to write, but then I had to undo that at the last minute. So a lot of rewriting.
Yeah. Family secrets. I wrote a book that kind of hinged on a family secret, and the really difficult thing was figuring out, like, okay, you can figure out, what the reality is, but how does it impact your character's current life? And I thought you did a great job of kind of making that converge. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because the punchline can't just be like, oh, so grandma, had a baby out of wedlock, that, unless that actually has a point going forward.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to write a little bit about the way family secrets then just start to affect the next generation. I think I had that in mind in part because I was an editor on a book, a nonfiction memoir for another writer recently, and it was about her family's Holocaust story. And she wrote about how her parents wouldn't talk about it. They lived through this very traumatic event, and then they made their way to the United States, and they didn't want to think about it and they didn't want to talk about it, but it's there. And her father wound up taking his own life, and so I had that idea of just like the powerfully corrosive effect of not talking about these things. And then also because this accident happened in the 60s, it was a different mentality that we had about or that our parents had about talking about things like that. So if something bad happens, it's better to just not talk about it. So
and then it's like it didn't happen.
It didn't happen. So in the book, my character doesn't, this has been done to her by the older generation, but she doesn't even realize she's doing the same thing to her daughter by not talking about it. And even if you don't talk about something, kids pick up on it, and her daughter already pretty much knew this story, but they just were not having a conversation about it. So.
In what ways is your character like you or unlike you?
Well, the one thing that's definitely autobiographical is she's a writing instructor, and I have in the novel a lot of these stories from her students are stuck in her head, and she ruminates on them because so there's a lot about writing in the novel. It's also a novel about writing itself, and I find I've been teaching writing for at least 20 years, and I have all those stories are in my head. I don't always remember the people. People will come up to me and introduce themselves and say, I took your class, and I don't remember them, but I say, what was your story? And they tell me, and I remember. And a lot of them are kind of harrowing. There's one, it's actually getting published, this one, that was set during the Spanish Inquisition. And I just remember these characters like on the torture rack. And then I never saw how the book ended. So, so I was writing about that. Beyond that, I have zero connection to this story with the bridge or to the Mothman or any of that. I certainly know, I know the marital piece about what that's like, but it's not based on anything from my own life. But I guess I was able to write about that sort of with some emotional knowledge. So.
The husband was such a great comic character because he's just so obsessed with the weather.
No, not Paul. Yeah, he's a meteorologist, and I interviewed a couple of meteorologists, including my cousin. This is my cousin here, and my another cousin, her sister's son, is a meteorologist, which I didn't even know till he graduated college and just became a meteorologist. So he was able to give me a tip or two, and then I'm kind of shy about. I'm not a reporter. I thought I was going to be a reporter, but I found I really didn't like talking to people and asking them questions. But I did work up the nerve to contact the DC local meteorologist, if anyone's from DC, Matthew Capucci. And I called him on the phone and asked him a bunch of questions. So I did a little bit of meteorology.
Research. Well, that was very realistic. I believed it totally. One more thing before questions. Dogs.
Dogs, yes.
You have a lot of great dogabilia in this book.
Yeah.
The dogs are like, the dog is, well, two dogs,
Yeah.
characters in their own right.
Yeah, the dogs are very central to the book. In a way, I didn't even know till I got to the end that they play a big role in the book. But yeah, my character's kind of dog obsessed, and she's always had a dog in her life. And as you heard in the opening, that she has a new puppy, and the puppy's very poorly behaved. I saw one. I try not to look at the Goodreads reviews because they're often just like hellacious.
So mean.
People just go on there and like, this is the worst book I've ever read. But I saw one. I'm finding it kind of amusing too to read some of the bad reviews. And someone said, and they're not wrong, they're like, this dog was so poorly behaved, like it really bothered me that no one trained this dog. And I was like, well, you're not wrong.
It's more dramatic that way.
Yeah, well, that was a little bit from real life because we did have a puppy, a COVID puppy, rescue puppy that, yeah, she gave me a lot of inspiration, more than I really wanted for the behavior of this puppy. In fact, I won't give it away, but she goes and she gets stuck in West Virginia, which needed to happen for plot purposes. And in the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, Richard Gere gets stuck in West Virginia because his car breaks down. But that's such a cliche to have the car break down. And I was like, how am I going to get her stranded in West Virginia? Well, my dog then did a very expensive, terrible thing. And I was like, well, the only good thing about what she's just done is now I know how she gets stuck in West Virginia.
Questions? Yes.
A writing question. It's two-part. And what, because you're so disciplined in your writing and you've been doing it so long, when you sit down in front of that blank page every day, I'm wondering, do you know if it's going to be a good or bad writing day, or does the muse come to you? Wondering about that, and how much of good writing is rewriting?
Yeah. Yeah, the question is if I know if it's going to be a good writing day or not. Yeah. No, I often don't. And in fact, today, I'm sort of semi on vacation here, but I'm forcing myself to write, at least like a couple hours a day. And it started off feeling like a very bad writing day because, as I said, I deleted a lot of. I always look at my word count. It's like, wow, I just lost a lot of words today. And then just as I was sort of agonizing, not wanting to do this, all of a sudden, just some line of dialogue, banter came to me, and it started to be a lot of fun. So I think it's like the exercise analogy. You never really want to exercise, but once you start doing it, it can be fun or give you energy. And what was the other question?
How much of it is rewriting?
Oh, a lot is rewriting, but the rewriting is what's fun. I like rewriting. I mean, it's a good day when I get to a scene that I've already written, because rewriting, you're just playing with language and making it better. You're not like pulling out of thin air words and scenes. So, thank you. Yes.
I'm intrigued how you write a comedy about Marx's youngest daughter.
Yeah, I was kind of crushed by that feedback, but the answer is because I had two narratives going. I had a historical narrative, and then I had a protagonist who was writing her dissertation about Karl Marx's younger daughter, and it was set in a Washington think tank, which already you can see how that's funny, just a Washington think tank called the Institute of Thought. So I guess it was like that thread was funny. I didn't really realize that it was, everyone kept saying, just cut this historical material. So that was very painful, but I cut I cut a lot of it. I still retained a little bit of the story that I'd spent years researching because I was really fascinated by the idea of Karl Marx as a family man. And,
Yeah.
you know, he was very bourgeois in the way he wanted to raise his daughters. He wanted them to have nice dresses and marry well and go to the right schools.
Wow.
And meanwhile, he's like dealing with his carbuncles and borrowing money from Engels. I mean, I just became fascinated with that whole story. So it's a good question.
Who else? Yes.
You said that you put this book, you started it, you put it away. Two things. What makes you go back to it? And then secondly, how many books do you have sitting in the drawer that
Yeah, well, I have a boring answer there. I went back to it because I had another book I needed to produce, and I already had at least thought about this. So I just didn't know what I was doing with it. But I think it was a good exercise for me because I didn't know the story and it was very other for me. Most of my books have had some germ of a beginning that had to do with my life. Like I wrote a couple books, set in, they're almost always set where I live because I just absorb settings. So this was other, both in that I had no connection to the story and no connection to West Virginia. I had only been there, to drop my kids at summer camp or that might have actually been the only time I'd been there now that I think about it. So, yeah. Was that your question? I just start talking and I can't.
The other was how many do you have sitting in the
Oh,
drawer?
well, I have that first unpublished novel, which was probably a good thing because it probably wasn't very good. I think it was not meant to be published. I have a fully completed manuscript that I haven't really done anything with yet, but a memoir that I don't know what to do with. But other than that, I don't have any other novel threads sitting around. If I did, I'd be pulling them out right now as I'm kind of desperate to think.
I know.
What
I
the
was
next
just
one
trying to
is.
count up how many I have. I have at least 3.
Do you?
Yeah.
So are they ones you might go back to?
I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of, I like them, but I don't know if they'll see life beyond the drawer,
Yeah.
the metaphorical drawer.
Yeah.
Yes.
First, big fan of the Mothman Chronicles. I've seen it more times.
Oh, really?
It's good for a Saturday night.
It is. It is. Kind of popcorn movie. Yeah.
My question is about you have 2 jobs essentially, right? You're a writer in the mornings, and then you go to your other job in the afternoons where you're involved with the selling of literature, the marketing of literature, the promotion of it, and organizing these kinds of events. And does one inform the other a lot? And does working in the store, does it armor you in a way if you're aware of the realities of
Yeah.
books, right? That you wouldn't have that armor necessarily if you weren't doing that.
I think so. I think it's kind of counterintuitive that it does give me armor because you would think working in a store where you're just having, you see all these hugely successful books and you see all these huge authors coming through and, as just sort of doing what I love doing, it probably should make me stop doing this and realize what the odds are of breaking through. And I know so much about publishing at this point, just through both always having been interested in it, but now reading all the industry trades and having been doing this for so long and also working a literary nonprofit. I know so much about it that you would think it would turn me off from doing it. But like I said before, it makes me realize it's just, it is just inventory and I'm just doing what I love doing. And I also feel very privileged and I'm aware of the level of privilege of publishing because it's very, very hard to publish. I have so many really talented students that I can't believe they can't get their novels published. So I'm just very grateful for what I'm able to do. And I kind of love working there and just I like helping other people with their books. I really genuinely do. It's my little bit of sad public service is like scheduling author events and helping them sign their books. And
May I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
Is there something that strikes you about, particularly like a new novel, somebody's written the first book or second book? Do they sometimes struggle to make that transition from, well, I've written the book, but now I got to talk about the book.
oh,
And I
sure.
gotta be engaging when I talk about it. Do you notice that coming up in terms of what you do on the other side of your life?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much pressure these days, almost less with the talking about it, but then on the marketing of books, especially more and more. I mean, as publishers start to kind of scale back what they'll do for marketing, even if you're with a big publisher that, I'm grateful my publisher is very good about getting it out into the world of digital social media, but there's also a lot of pressure on me to be posting. They send me things they want me to post on Instagram, and I, maybe it's my age, but I don't love doing that. But I do what they ask me to do because I don't want to not be trying to promote my own book. So I think that's what I hear most from authors, young and my age, old, but that they don't love having to be self-promoting the way that they need to. And yeah, there's a lot of, it makes a lot of sense that the kind of personality that's going to sit in a room alone and write for hours and hours a day is not the same person who's going to get up and speak before an audience. So there's definitely some of that. You get, most of the authors who come through the store are reasonably good speakers. And post-COVID, one good change, I think, is because during COVID, all these events went virtual. We started to have conversation partners, and that makes it so much easier to just talk about the book rather than stand up and read. And today I got Jane to read for me. I don't like to read. I don't like to hear. When I start reading, I just start like wanting to edit every sentence, and
Editing never ends.
it never ends. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Yes, you talked a little bit about this balance of pulling inspiration from places, but being nervous about using a real hotel name or not wanting people to feel like they've been skewered. And I wonder if there's parts of your personal life or other things that you try to put a bubble around, and that's kind of off limits for inspiration, or if you're comfortable going anywhere. And if you are comfortable going anywhere, I have to ask, since we're in his town, if you've ever written a character inspired by your sweet baby on Max.
Well, I might want to let Max answer that question.
I always ask that question. Was it the misbehaved?
No, I mean, I try. I'm not out to skewer people, so I sort of go out of my way to not have that happen. And Max knows without my talking about it, I did write one book that was a little close to the bone for my children, all of them. It was a comedy though, and it was not about any particular people, but even though, and it got heavily lawyered too, which was an amusing process, I must say. The lawyer would say, well, who might think that they're this character?
Oh, wow.
And then instead of maybe instead of actually giving me like the legal grounds for why I could or could not do it, they'd look the person up and say, oh, that this person has this personal problem in their life. They're never going to sue you because they don't want to. So it was like kind of crazy. But with one exception, I have never had anything come up. And the one exception was very upsetting because it was somebody who my third book was made into a television movie, and I didn't write the script. So they changed up some of the things about a certain character, and then somebody thought that it was very upsetting, and finally calmed down. But I hadn't written that, but I don't know, maybe, I don't know what happened. It never became litigious. It just was upsetting because I so hadn't meant for that to happen. But
I don't know what time
yeah,
is it.
we're right at pretty much right at time.
Any one
Any
more
last
question?
questions?
If anyone has one.
Leanna.
A more lighthearted question. If it was to become a movie adaptation, who would play Cassie?
Ah,
Great question.
that is a great question. I don't know. Would you like to? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, in my mind, it would be like a Richard Gere and Laura Linney, younger versions of them, but I really haven't thought about it too much. But I have to thank Leanna because she told me about this bookstore, so I'm very glad to be here.
Yeah,
you know.
it's great.
So,
Well, thank you
yeah,
very
thank
much,
you.
Susan.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Susan will be signing.
Yes.
We have plenty of books out there.
Here. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.